We need to look at the customer life cycle in stages and create purpose-built measurement models for each different part of the customer life cycle. Stage 1, how do we get our target accounts in market and want to buy? Multi-touch attribution does a fucking terrible job of measuring it because most of the things that happen there that are most effective are things that do not get tracked in a digital touch point. The most expensive, important process in the entire go-to-market is how do we convert an in-market account to close one revenue. 80% of the marketing budget gets spent there, basically 100% of SDR resources get expended there, and most of the sales resources, solutions, consultants, and other parts of the process happen right there from our sales team takes an action, and then when do we close them? And we have developed a concept called signals in signal analytics. And I don't believe it's an attribution mechanism. I believe it's a way to optimize the go-to-market around where are we investing money, where should we have our strategic initiatives, where are our biggest opportunities to create breakthroughs in growth and ROI.
It's Attribution Nation time, where we look at attribution from multiple angles in a unique mini-series format. You're in the trenches with me for the next 5 episodes, talking to attribution practitioners. Let's go. You've seen him on LinkedIn. You may even know him as an attribution critic, and yet he's now a member of Attribution Nation. Welcome to the show, Chris Walker, former CEO of Refine Labs, current CEO of Passetto. Is that right?
That is. What's up, Attribution Nation? I'm not sure that I can be fully coined that I'm in the nation, but we are on the podcast. And I think what people are going to find is that we're a lot more aligned than you think. And what I've spent a lot of time doing over the past 5 years is poking holes in certain ways about how companies use attribution. The data is not like you collect all these touch points. I'm not trying to argue whether the touch point happened or not. The touch point happened and it was tracked, but how companies use that to decide budget, to calculate ROI, to decide what they're going to do in their future strategy, those are where the flaws reside. And what I've been communicating, I thought clearly, but maybe there's been a lot of misunderstanding. But I do think the way that companies use attribution, multi-touch, single touch, W-shaped model, U-shaped model, we can get into all the different details, but that's a good place to start maybe, but I'll let you drive the conversation.
Yeah, honestly, when I first had the idea of Attribution Nation, I said, I'm going to get Chris on because he is the biggest detractor of attribution out there on LinkedIn. But I do think that there's a lot of common ground that we have, and I wanted to be able to spend some time to explore that common ground. And here we are. We're going to get to talk about that. But before we do that, I want to kind of go back in history and talk about a little bit about how you came to your viewpoints on attribution and how you got where you've been. So let's go back to around 2019-ish, which is around when you started Refine Labs, a B2B demand gen agency. Why did you start Refine Labs at that time?
Yeah, let's go back further to 2016, 17, 18. I worked at a B2B company called Vapotherm, 300-person medical device company, 100 field sales and CSM, small handful of SDRs, underinvestment in marketing. When I came in there, the marketing department basically spent money on building trade show booths, national booths, regional booths. The sales team would come, they make brochures, they do product marketing, and the website was not taken care of at all, and it was a total, just basically a sales enablement and product marketing function inside of that company. And I went through a process over time for the first 90 days, I was in the field with our sales team, and I was seeing what does a first sales call look like? How does that person receive? What objections they have? What questions they have? How long does it take us to get to the next meeting? And then you start looking at the historical data and like, what is our ACV? What's our sales velocity? How long is our sales cycle? What are our win rates from meeting to closed one, from stage 3 to closed one? You start looking at the data and you say, wow, like, especially when you filter it off just net new business instead of expansion, what the company was not looking at, or they were just looking at revenue. But when you start looking at net new business, damn, it takes us way too long to close a $20,000 a year contract. It's taking us 270 days to close a $20K annual contract and break into a new customer. And our win rate from meeting to closed one is 4%. And so our field sales team is in the field. Sometimes they need to fly to go and have that meeting that they're going to win at 4%. And that takes a whole week, one day of travel, do the meeting. Maybe you try and see a couple of other things while you're out there, and then you come home and it's Friday. And so how inefficient is that? In a year, a sales rep would close 2 net new customers. And then I started spending time understanding, okay, like, how do our customers want to buy? and where are they actually like learning about things? And I spent time looking at that. And the reality was our customers wanted to do all these different steps in the process before they talked to our sales team that we were ignoring. They wanted to understand the clinical data. They wanted to talk to another company that used the product inside of their state or inside of their city. They wanted to understand from a thought leader or someone like that that had actually used the product, how to use it. They wanted to have clinical guidelines from somebody that they trusted, and they wanted to know the price of the product. And they had clear things that they wanted to do. And instead of trying to lean in and say, okay, here's what our customer wants, let's do that, we just tried to get an SDR to book a meeting and shove it down their throat. And then I spent some time understanding, okay, well, where do these people learn? Sure, everyone knows that they go to conferences to learn, but what do they do for the other 363 days of the year? They spend time on Twitter listening to people. They told me the exact people that they listened to. Some people were posting on Facebook at that time, respiratory therapists, neonatal nurses, people like that. And some, physicians were using LinkedIn. And so able to take all of that data back and say, hey, we need to rethink how we get our customers to want to buy, specifically how we close net new business, because we're actually really good at expansion once we get into an account. But we can't be taking this long to get into new customers, or we're not going to be able to grow, and our customer acquisition cost is way too high. So I went on an endeavor for the first for 2 years of that company to build a top level digital demand strategy that effectively got our customers interested in buying, that allowed our sales team to win deals in a lot more productive and a productive way. And by listening to customers, the things that I did inside of the strategy were very different than the current best practices of what people would do. We ran ungated content through Facebook ads. We ran promotional things via Facebook ads. We built a video podcast in 2016 and 17, and I personally interviewed people and recorded 35 episodes. That was like way ahead of its time. We then distributed that through email. We put it on our website. And when I started, we would get $0 in net new business from our website. And at the end of my time there, we were getting 35% of net new business that came through the website that won 4 times faster, sales cycles of 70 days instead of 270 days, win rates of 35% from a meeting to close one instead of 4%. Some sales reps made President's Club because of one of the deals that came inbound in their territory that they won, and they were, help their year and potentially change their career. And then when I started to look at the analytics around what was happening, we went into HubSpot analytics, and it was like, okay, all of the impact is coming from organic search and direct traffic. And we're barely doing any SEO. There's no complex SEO strategy here. All the money, and then as we invested more money in content that was distributed on those types of channels like Facebook ads and things like that, up to a level where to distribute some of our new clinical trials, we were spending $50,000, $75,000 a month. And what would happen in 1 month, the entire country knew that clinical trial came out. That was one of the most important things for a customer to know before they talked to our sales team. And as we continued to spend more money, we continued to get more and more results coming inbound and more revenue coming inbound. And so all the money is going to certain places, but the attribution is telling us an entirely different story. And I'm in the back pulling every single lever. I sent the emails, built the ads, built the content, pulling every single lever. And I basically said, the data that I'm getting about these analytics is total shit. And what I get from listening to customers and running the machine, I know better what's actually working, because when you pull all the levers, you could actually feel it,
Oh, yeah, totally.
And so that was the big insight. And I had the same thing. I started an e-commerce company in 2016, and a majority of the sales would come, I would run ads and I would post content on Saturday mornings on Instagram, was the best performing time. And we would get all these sales, and the sales would come through, and I would check the names of the people that bought it, and then against the people that would comment on some of the posts and ads, and I would see that match up. And then the Shopify data would say all this stuff is coming from organic search, because what people are seeing the ad on their mobile device, they'd rather buy on their computer. They go to their computer, they search the brand, and they close. And there was just a massive gap in the way to run effective marketing versus what the data and analytics is telling you, because of this big gap in dark social. And then over time, I just continued, especially in B2B companies, continued to see how handcuffed and how obsessed they were by these levels of basic attribution that prevented them from doing what are clearly the most effective things in marketing. And at Refine Labs, that wasn't the impetus of starting the company. But over time, you continue to see company after company do the same thing and run into the same problems and have the same issues with analytics. And as I saw more and more companies struggle with it and doing the same dumb shit and getting the same result that's not working for them, I started having more confidence to talk about it more. And over time, I have just continued to see, and even still to today, tons of companies fall into this trap where they only look at certain attribution data that can be tracked with a digital touch point that gives a very incomplete picture about what's happening and what's actually working for their customer.
Yeah, so you started this kind of shift in the organization that you were working with at the time and how they approached marketing and even just sales and go to market. And sounds like you saw that this was working and saw that, hey, I'm doing things differently. I've got some different ideas here than what's being done a lot in the B2B world. I got a business opportunity here to spread this and help other companies change their approach and get better results as a result of that. And that's kind of how Refined Labs was born. Is that right?
More or less, yeah. And it's not like every single company that worked with us was hyper successful over 5 years. Companies that would not change their mindset around data and measurement and attribution fail. Why? Because the things that we do don't get picked up by those things. So even if pipeline is growing and money's being spent there and all the business metrics are heading in the right result, if they don't have that touch point to attach it to some Facebook ad, it's not a lead gen ad, then they're saying, oh, this must not be working because we can't measure it for our demand waterfall model to know how much we should spend on Facebook ads, what is our cost per lead, and what is the conversion rate. And people get stuck in this idea, especially at that time. It's a little bit different now and the problems are different, but at that time it was just every channel, single channel lead gen. Just run one channel, get a lead, try and build the funnel downstream. So every single thing, no matter whether it's an awareness channel or an intent channel or anything, it's just meant, let's collect an email address, let's have our SDRs call them, let's measure the funnel, and let's look at what does it cost us to get a lead. And if we're able to get a lead on Google for $19 and we get leads on LinkedIn for $120, then Google ads must be better. And at that time, a lot of companies didn't look anything further downstream. They didn't collect the data to look at the conversion rate to meeting and pipeline and close one. So all they could look at was what was the cost per lead. And it's an incredibly misleading data point when it comes to both marketing efficiency, but also entire go-to-market efficiency. It impacts downstream how productive your SDRs are. And then depending on, where those leads or what we call signals now came from, that your win rates from stage 2 to close 1 can be very different, from 4% to 40% or that type of range in sales productivity from the same opportunity based on the intent of the buyer that's being shown there. And companies just didn't collect that data at that time.
Yeah. So early on, Refined Labs, you've got a very different approach than a lot of the other, particularly demand gen agencies that existed at that time. It sounds like you were probably having to swim upstream a little bit because you're having to change minds. So what kind of early projects were you getting and doing through Refined Labs, and kind of like how difficult was it to get people to change their approach and see it your way?
I've made the joke a couple of times that if I just did what the market thought that they wanted from 2019 to now, I'd have a $100 million company now. Trying to change the way that people do things is hard. It takes much longer of a time. It requires the amount of effort that I put into producing content and distributing it, and the challenges around when, the CFO doesn't get it because they're still listening to what Gartner said or what Forrester said from 2011 and the models they created back then, that if I just sold people, hey, we'll run your LinkedIn ads and we'll get you the cheapest leads, which we would be able to, we're the best at advertising. It's not complicated to get cheap leads on LinkedIn. What's hard is to get customers at an appropriate cost using LinkedIn ads. And if I had just sold what people wanted to, my company would be $100 million in revenue right now. And maybe I'm dumb for trying to change things because I've seen it work. Maybe that wasn't a smart business decision. Who knows? And there are massive agencies that work with big B2B brands that get paid $1 million a year to do things that don't help them at all, that actually are negatively impacting the entire business by spending that much money on an agency and then $10 million on ads and then all the unproductive SDR work and everything else downstream. And so, yeah, I had seen it work before, and over time, for the companies that adopted, I continue to see it work. And there's people that promote it, like what Cognism has done over the past couple of years in changing their strategy and the impact that it's had on their business, and many other success stories about the way that we look at and evaluate the success of both marketing, and now I look at the entire go-to-market and the data across the entire go-to-market, that it's clear that it's a better path to take, but requires fundamental mindset shifts that frankly require a really strong CMO to manage an executive team. And, many companies don't have that.
Tell us a little bit more about, like, you've talked about this shift in mindset and like the path that organizations should be taking. What path? Like what should they be doing?
So core insight and recommendation that companies should take is that right now, B2B companies try to use one tool to measure the effectiveness across the entire customer lifecycle, and it's entirely flawed. Whether you use multi-touch attribution, and then whatever model you use around multi-touch attribution, or some people just are going to use last touch or first touch, they're going to use a single touch model. Some companies are like, can't even fucking measure their Google ads, but they're buying marketing mix modeling software and spending 9 months to implement that garbage. And so they're just like trying to take one tool and be able to measure it. The second issue is that analytics happen in departmental level silos in B2B companies right now. So marketing has their tools over here to measure the marketing investments, and then SDRs get their data from sales after outreach, and they basically measure on how many meetings and did we attain our quota. And then sales has their own quota and their own data and analytics and their own tools for forecasting or territory management or whatever they have. And then when you bring that all together, there becomes conflicting data. It doesn't match up. And then as a go-to-market team, when you try to make decisions across the entire go-to-market, it becomes fundamentally impossible because you spend the whole meeting arguing about the quality of the data, not trying to make a decision around what to do next. And so what I've recommended to companies as a big thing is we need to look at the customer life cycle in stages and create purpose-built measurement models for each different part of the customer life cycle. Stage 1, how do we get our target accounts in market and want to buy? That is a stage that's very important. Multi-touch attribution does a fucking terrible job of measuring it because most of the things that happen there that are most effective are things that do not get tracked in a digital touch point. So we need a new measurement model to look at that. The most expensive, important process in the entire go-to-market is how do we convert an in-market account to close one revenue. 80% of the marketing budget gets spent there. Basically 100% of SDR resources get expended there. And most of the sales resources, solutions, consultants, and other parts of the process happen right there from our sales team takes an action, and then when do we close them? And we have developed a concept called signals in signal analytics to be able to look at that part of the process, which is effectively a optimization mechanism of tracking all the different processes, understanding where people came from, what level of accounts. You can filter data, you can look at conversion rates and stage changes and things like that. And I don't believe it's an attribution mechanism. I believe it's a way to optimize the go-to-market around where are we investing money, where should we have our strategic initiatives, where are our biggest opportunities to create breakthroughs in growth and ROI. And then you'd have another one on post-sale. And maybe you'd actually break post-sale up into multiple things in terms of getting the customer to be successful or to hit an aha moment, and then to go through expansion, renewal, and places like that. And you'd fundamentally need a different model to measure the effectiveness of those things as well. And so I just think that using one blanket tool to measure the entire customer lifecycle is one of the core root causes. And then secondarily, I don't think there are that many companies that actually look at the go-to-market as an entire go-to-market process. It's more looked at as departmental level silos that bubble up to something.
See, this is where you and I have a ton of common ground that I don't think has ever really been discussed much, is the siloed view of reporting and analytics is absolutely killing marketing departments and go-to-market teams, because you have an event team over here that's doing their own analytics. Obviously, they have their own bias that they're going to spin the results to make themselves look good, number one. Number two, they're going to try to optimize their attribution. And in some cases, that might be detrimental to the rest of the marketing department or even the organization holistically. And then you've got them competing for credit against other departments in marketing, which then layers up to the competing credit between marketing and SDRs and sales, where they're fighting over dollars, when in reality, it doesn't matter because nobody's coming for the commission of the BDRs and the sales reps. None of that matters, but the siloed structure of reporting and analytics, whether it's from a team standpoint or a software standpoint, is just killing marketing departments and go-to-market teams. You can't you can't get a holistic view of how people are performing and where your investments are actually returning ROI by looking at little departmental fiefs that are trying to claim land that ultimately the organization owns.
It's the difference between bottoms up reporting and tops down reporting, and specifically in the marketing department. But then when you layer up the go-to-market teams, the same thing happens when you combine marketing and SDRs and sales and CS and AM, that it's all bottoms up. And so in marketing, you got the events team, you have the digital team, you got your PR agency, you got the social media and brand team. And what are those director level people trying to do? They're trying to defend their budget, and they're trying to get more budget. So what? They are fundamentally biased to show that things are working, not that things aren't working. They'll go as far as to buy a specific tool that can just particularly measure their one thing in order to level that up. And so what happens is that you have 5 or 7 different budget holders that are all trying to take credit for the same dollar that you get in revenue. And what happens is you have go-to-market bloat. You have marketing investment bloat, where you have $5 or $7 being spent and all taking credit for the same dollar. Where back in the day, there were a lot of flaws in last touch or single touch attribution. But one thing that wasn't a flaw is it forced you to make a decision where you spend $1 and you have to attach that dollar to $1 in revenue, where multi-touch attribution and influence revenue allow this, multiple credits to happen that have created massive bloat in the go-to-market team and the marketing investments. And what happens for a CMO or an executive, another person on the executive team that's responsible for evaluating and deploying these investments, is that they actually have no fucking clue what's going on. And so the solution is, just like we do in finance, is to pair and have multiple models running. You have a tops-down model that forces choices, and you have a bottoms-up model that comes from individual contributors. And bottoms-up models are great for tactical optimizations and incremental improvements and things like that. And the tops-down model is great for making macro strategy adjustments that become very obvious.
See, this is where we agree 100%.
Fundamentally, companies do not have a tops-down analytics model for their go-to-market.
No, they don't. Because they just leave it in the hands of the individual contributors to show how good they're doing, which is fundamentally opposed to a top-down reporting structure.
And we cannot expect a director level person to sound the alarm about their $1 million a month in advertising dollars to say it's not working. It is not their responsibility to do that. We need to have an analytics system at the CFO level and the CEO level and the revenue leadership level, where we know that, where we can flag that if something's off track within 7, 14 days, 30 seconds, 1 month, whatever the time period is, that alarms are going off in the C-level meeting to say this isn't working. And then it's our job as executives to then go into the analytics and use the people around us that are ideally unbiased around the outcome. So, external consultants, revenue operations people, other people like that aren't responsible for the budget specifically, to then go in and evaluate and try and make a lot of decisions around that.
Yeah, we every time we talk to a CMO about analytics, it's always, you need to have a dedicated person that is like your right hand, that is the unbiased arbiter of what's working and what's not working. And that role is critically underfunded or not funded at all in most marketing organizations. And that's one of the big reasons why they have so much trouble reporting on what's working and what's not.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of made a big bet with my new company, Passetto, that the most appropriate seat for that role is not internal, that actually having an external firm or advisor or fractional that sees 10, 100, 1,000 companies' data and sees a lot of the different experience is going to be able to provide you insights at a level that an internal person never will. I think, for lack of a better way, or a shortcoming of many marketing operations and revenue operations professionals, is that they've actually never done all the other jobs in marketing. They've never carried a bag in the sales department. They've never made an outbound phone call. And so how is that person with that skill set and experience supposed to weigh in to the chief revenue officer and the CMO about how to run the go-to-market strategy when they've never done any of the jobs inside a go-to-market? It's a limitation of the profile of a lot of the people in that role today.
Well, that also goes back to the fact that role is typically underfunded. It's usually given to a junior level person that has no idea about how to build a go-to-market strategy or marketing strategy. They know how to run some numbers, but they don't understand the strategic side of how to connect those numbers back to the strategy. And I think that's, again, I agree with you on the fact that it's better done by an external third-party organization, because it's one of the foundations of my business as well, is that we help do the analysis too. Like, we will, help you understand what the numbers mean and connect it to the larger strategic items.
And I think just being disconnected from the historical past of the company and the internal politics, and being able to sit in a seat where you're a lot more objective, has a ton of value. So even if as a business you run your own internal process, I believe in parallel you should be running an external process and being able to compare those results, because oftentimes you'll get different data. Even people that sit on the executive team will struggle to be able to call out certain things because of the politics inside of the executive team. And so I think it's real at all levels. And I think that it's not that you shouldn't do reporting internally. Obviously, you should do a lot of it, but I think you need to be able to check the biases and get an external view frequently.
Absolutely. I mean, the best authors, I use this analogy all the time. The best authors always have third-party editors. They always have editors, because it just makes everything you do better to get that unbiased opinion. No, this sucks, or this is wrong. Okay, cool. Let's go fix it, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about how you do report on performance, considering, you've talked a lot about the different areas where marketing attribution platforms can't see certain parts of the funnel. So what do you, when you're looking at wanting to get better analytics, what technology do you use that you think the organization should be investing in to help capture that data and to help understand what's performing, what's not working, and what's not performing, particularly in areas where, attribution platforms are struggling to see that information?
Yeah, so I think that the most important and underutilized tool inside of the entire go-to-market to optimize your go-to-market strategy and investments and process is actually the CRM. And I think the data there is a couple of core issues. One, the data is collected across a lot of different objects in disjointed ways. You have some data on the lead object and some data on the contact, and then you have campaign members, and then you have opportunity data, and you have an account data, and the data spread out across all these things, and you have to use cross-object reporting. And then the marketing manager is reporting on some things over here with their own filters, but then finance pulls it into BI and has their own manipulations, and all of a sudden you got 7 people in the company thinking that they're looking at the same data, and nobody's looking at the same data. And so I think the fundamental recommendation is that we need a pipeline or revenue architecture inside of our CRM that's able to bring all that data together, ideally into one single object that allows so everyone in the company has one single data source to be able to use for reporting and analytics and things like that. And then that data source also can push out to other tools and control processes and SLAs and other things like that. So I think that's one step. And I think that a lot of companies try to use multi-touch attribution as a replacement to an architecture inside of their pipeline. And this is really a go-to-market architecture, right? You have your opportunities, you have your stages and your opportunities, but what you're missing is all the stuff that happens before the opportunity is created, which has massive impacts in terms of the productivity of your entire go-to-market. And so we need to be looking at it. I'm really encouraging companies to redefine what pipeline means to them, and to, instead of saying pipeline means opportunity created to closed won, what pipeline means is our sales team takes an action against a person or an account to closed won. And what happens there is that then you have all the marketing data, you have the signal data, you have the SDR, SLAs, you know what sequences were set, we know when the meeting was booked, whether it was held, and then the opportunity gets created, and you have all that data in one place. You also have the account data, so you can segment by what's most effective in this geography, what's most effective in this segment, where right now it's very complicated to try and do what should be that level of simple analysis based on some level of segmentation. So I think that's step one, is having a pipeline architecture which is specifically built to optimize the process from we have an in-market account to closed won, or our sales team takes action to closed won, which is the most expensive part in the process and should be the number one thing B2B companies are thinking about and doing right now. The second thing is that B2B companies in product marketing and product management do a ton of customer research. They run surveys to understand what features people want, and they'll do focus groups, and they'll do all these different things to understand what product should we build, how should we price it, Is our messaging resonating, and things like that. We need to take that same methodology and bring it into the go-to-market team, and being able to understand from a variety of research methods, surveys, focus groups, customer interviews. We need to understand, how does our customer want to buy? Where are we falling short in that process, and what could we do to make it more easier and more aligned with what our customer actually wants? Where are the core places that our customers get information and learn about things? What platforms do they use? What communities are they a part of? What events do they attend? What influencers and source of information do they trust? And how do we get all of that information to them that gives us an entirely different view of how our customer buys than the data you see from a multi-touch attribution platform? And so I think bringing in a lot more qualitative, you can do quantitative customer research as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be qualitative as I think about it, but bringing in direct customer insights as a way to fuel our go-to-market strategy and potentially even our attribution strategy, I think is a big step in the right direction, because it unveils a massive blind spot for companies that they have right now. They think that all their revenue comes from organic search and direct traffic and paid search because of the biases around attribution. They don't realize that 30% of their revenue is getting referred to by happy customers or in the market. They don't recognize that 7% is coming from LinkedIn. They don't recognize that X, Y, and Z is happening in their data because they don't measure that stuff. And so I think that is a second big benefit that companies should inject into their process to understand and drive strategy.
So I want to make a couple comments in response to what you talked about the two steps there. So the first one that I want to comment on is your conversation about pipeline measurement and management. And this is, again, another area where you and I see eye to eye, is that organizations need to have some sort of a measure of what is considered to be qualified pipeline. Not the fact that we have a meeting booked. Like, quite frankly, the fact that we have a meeting booked means nothing in the grand scheme of optimizing go-to-market. Because you can optimize go-to-market for meetings, but if those meetings go nowhere, who gives a shit, right? So you've got to have some sort of designator that this isn't just a meeting, that this is actually qualified and we can sell to this person, and they actually have some sort of, interest in us. Absolutely, positively. I think you had a specific term for what you called that stage, but calling it qualified pipeline, I totally agree with you on that. Like, that is something that we absolutely have to have. The other piece of that puzzle is, I think that this is where I think that, again, your call out around self-reported attribution and just asking the question, how did you hear about us? Whether that's part of a form fill or part of a sales script, I think is super important to add context. I've always been an advocate of having both self-reported and an attribution platform, because when the attribution platform tells us, yeah, you came direct, cool, why? That's the piece that's missing from the data in the attribution platform that is answered by self-reported, right? And then self-reported, again, has a little bit of a, cool, you heard about us on a podcast, awesome, that's fantastic. How did you find us after that, right? That's the part that the self-reported, or excuse me, the attribution platform answers. So to make sure that like, our SEO doesn't suck and that you are actually able to find us after you heard about us on a platform or on a podcast. So I think both of them are in an ideal scenario, you have both of those things working together to paint a more complete picture than just, one or the other.
Yeah. The challenge is that for whatever reason in marketing, but also across entire B2B businesses, people are very uncomfortable with directional and qualitative insights, and not being looking for some spreadsheet report that's going to tell them exactly how to allocate all their marketing dollars, which is entirely unrealistic in the world that we live in. And maybe it was in 2011 when the internet was super fucking simple and there weren't social networks and there weren't communities and people barely invested in their websites and all they did was download PDFs and submit, lead forms. Maybe it was back then, but the way the world works today, we need to be able to look at data, directional data from a lot of different points, a lot of them coming from customers, a lot of them coming from our CRM and other tools, and bring that together and use our brain to develop a differentiated strategy about what our customer wants. There is no exact formula. And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that reality, which leads them back to, okay, let's just do what we did in 2011 because it's safer, because I'm more comfortable with that model, because it feels better for our CFO who doesn't really understand all of these nuances to be able to attach to that thing. And so I think there's a real insight there about like people don't even like the idea of self-reported attribution. And what they say is like, oh, somebody said they heard about us on a podcast. Well, it must be recency bias. It must, like, they probably listened to our podcast and saw us on LinkedIn and they talked to that person, but they only said podcast. We can't give 100% credit to the podcast. And it's like, no, that's not the purpose, but it is really important to know the fucking person heard us on a podcast.
Exactly.
It's really
Absolutely.
important. It's really important to know that. And then if we see that, often, like, we can start to have confidence to say, okay, let's keep going on the podcast. And then all of a sudden, when you start measuring that, and a lot of your closed won deals are saying that, then you can say, how do we make this better? How do we ramp it up? How do we get more influencers? How do we invest another $100,000 to make it? How do we expand? People love this content. How do we expand it into TikTok and YouTube Shorts and other places? How do we get the stuff posted on our website? And it's just like that simple insight can give you such powerful strategy adjustments and strategy direction just by looking at it. And everybody that implements it correctly and looks at the data within 30 days realizes how valuable it is. And it's unbelievable because my estimate is still 98%, 99% of companies do not collect that simple free data point that gives them a ton of great insights.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I want to just talk a little bit about kind of your evolving view of attribution. I think that your current state in where you're at now is that an attribution platform like a Visible or a CaliberMind or something like that is a piece of the larger puzzle. It's certainly not the end all be all and is not the only thing you should do for good analytics. But I believe your stance now is that it is a piece that adds valuable data. Is that correct?
I think that having a tool that tracks every trackable interaction from, people that you want to sell to and accounts that you want to sell to, especially as a more, mid-market or enterprise company, is a good idea. I think that having that data is a good idea. I think there are a lot of nuances around it. I think that I personally really struggle with closed platforms that pull data out and never push any data back into Salesforce because then nobody else can really use it. So I like most attribution tools that aren't Visible or Full Circle are going to pull that out and make you go into their platform to use it because they know if they gave it back to you in Salesforce, you would replicate it in BI and you would churn from them. And so I don't like how companies require you to go out there because there's no way that the finance team is going to go to CaliberMind and start reporting out of it. And so I think that we need to have that data ideally back in the CRM. My company Passetto is fully compatible with Full Circle and Visible, the only two tools that I know of that push all those data points back into Salesforce or a CRM. And so I think that's one nuance. I think a lot of the models that are created from those vendors overestimate the impact of the marketing dollars and are biased to the highest volume thing. So if you look at an influenced revenue report from a 100 million ARR company, what is it going to say? The content syndication and lead generation things that create the highest number of touch points are the most effective things in their marketing engine. And they're not. They just create the most digital trackable touch points and then the models get biased around them. So I think that specifically there's influence revenue models broadly, I think need to be challenged because I think that they do not help CMOs make decisions. Most CMOs tell me that, and that's why they hire my company because they look at an influence revenue report. They know the report isn't what's happening in reality and they don't know what to do about it. So I think that those are a couple of my thoughts around the state of attribution. So just to recap, it's a good idea to have every single digital interaction tracked. You should have a tool that can track that. My position is that data should live in your CRM, not in an external tool, and that specifically influenced revenue reporting against a buying group or against every contact on an opportunity or against every contact or an account spreads out the credit across too many data points and typically leads you to inaction or not having any clear insights.
I think those are fair points. And I think that to your point about the attribution models, I think that any tool, I view attribution models as tools. It's like a wrench in a wrench set. Each attribution model has a specific use case. But I also believe that the tool is only as good as the person using the tool. The guitar in my hands produces a very different result in sound than a guitar in the hands of Tom Morello or Eddie Van Halen, right? Like, so a tool is only as good as the person using the tool. And it also has to be used for the right use case, right? And we see a lot of people that use those attribution models for the wrong use case. So I think that that's something that we have a lot of common ground there. So we're getting close to time. So what I want to do is I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about Passetto, your new venture. You've already kind of sprinkled some hints in here, but tell us a little bit about Passetto and what you're doing over there now.
Yeah, I mean, the core insight is that over the past 2-3 years, the landscape of B2B companies has fundamentally changed. The funding environment has changed. The amount of people that are buying software tools has changed. How investors value companies has changed. How the public markets value companies has changed. And a lot of the analytics and a lot of the ways that we drive strategy in 2021 no longer work today. And so I think there's a large opportunity, which is why we started the Passetto, and with the economic situation being a tailwind for us, that a majority of private mid-market B2B companies, it costs them more than 4 years to pay back the cost of acquiring a customer without adjusting for gross margin. And so once you adjust for gross margin, now we're at 5 years or 5.5 years to pay back the cost of acquiring a customer. Those same companies will spend somewhere between 40 and 60% of revenue on sales and marketing and are currently growing somewhere between 10 and 20% if they're lucky. A lot of companies are planning to grow 18%, and they're more than likely going to grow 12 to 15% this year. And so when you take that excessive go-to-market bloat where too much money is being spent on sales and marketing, and your company's growing at 10 or 15%, it puts massive pressure on your EBITDA profile, and combined with your growth rate, how investors are going to value your company. It impacts your ability to IPO. It impacts your ability to raise money without doing a significant down round. It completely changes your runway, and it changes how you're able to, it changes the value of everyone in the company's stock, including the investors, but also the employees and the people that have invested a lot of time there. And we've developed a solution that combines both technology and expert go-to-market consulting with people that have actually done marketing, have actually sold deals, and have actually looked at the analytics, people that have experience across all the core functions of go-to-market strategy. And we peer those two things together using a concept called signals, which we believe is the fastest way to optimize your go-to-market. And some companies could reduce their customer acquisition cost by somewhere between 30 and 50% in 6 months or less, just by looking at all the places where they waste money and stop doing them. And so we help companies decide how they're going to allocate their budget. We develop benchmarks based on our 52 companies of mid-market SaaS companies that we've analyzed so far. So we have what we believe is the most accurate benchmark database, which then allows companies to understand how does my performance rank overall against other companies, but also allows our consultants to figure out where are the biggest opportunities for these people to create breakthroughs based on the benchmarks and how we see other companies perform. And then we deliver them a strategy. And then over time, we deliver them a strategy, we guide their team into implementing, and then every single quarter we're measuring the progress and we're injecting new insights into their strategy. We believe that it's basically an external go-to-market strategy that's differentiated by our software and data model. And so that's what we're building. It's early. We announced the company in January, so we've only been running with this for about 4 or 5 months, but I love this stage because you make such rapid progress. 4 or 5 months ago, people thought that Passetto was the same thing as Refine Labs. I think people are starting to figure out that what we're up to is very different, and how we're approaching it is very different, and even the core problem we're solving is very different. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do we give executives the data that they need to make decisions of how to allocate tens of millions of dollars next year? How do we give them the data they need to make decisions about how do we get our marketing investments from $20 million and get the same exact impact at $12 million in the next couple of years? Because companies are not getting the appropriate ROI off of their marketing programs, their marketing budget overall, their SDR headcount, and most sales teams are at 30, 40% quota attainment. So across the board, every single individual department in the go-to-market is underperforming. And then when you roll that up, it starts to compound. And so we help companies try to sort through that, specifically larger companies, because the costs and the pain of those problems are expensive and hard. And we've developed a process because you don't change those things overnight. You need to stagger that out and figure out what is our roadmap to be able to get this, our CAC payback period from 4.5 years to 2.5 years over the next 2 years. that type of stuff doesn't change overnight. And so we've developed a process to be able to help companies get there over time.
Awesome. I love it. I mean, I love analytics. I love data and numbers and helping people optimize. So I think it's exciting to me personally. So I wish you the best of luck with it. And yeah, I know that we'll keep in touch as you're growing that business. So in order to close out the episode here, I usually like to kind of talk through some of the key takeaways that I've learned from the conversation today. So the first one here is to listen to your customers, normalize surveys, focus groups, and pick up the phone to talk to them, particularly as part of the go-to-market motion, not part of the product marketing, but go-to-market needs to do that as well. I think rethinking your funnel in terms of what you measure and how you define your stages, super important because it gives you a more holistic view to how you're going to be reporting on things. Instead of using the one model that all organizations use, which is like a bottom-up reporting structure, you need both bottom-up and top-down. You've got to get that top-down approach to remove all the silos and the biases that are happening in the bottom-up. We also should be looking at multiple different buckets in terms of reporting. I love this one a lot because it includes the awareness piece of out-of-market accounts, which is a piece that's typically missing that most organizations don't really do a good job of reporting on, as well as that 80% piece of the funnel, which is once they're in market through to closed won, which is what most organizations are already spending time on. Not great, but they're spending time on it. And then also that post-sale piece. Marketing silos are ruining good marketing, and it's making it impossible to understand what works and what's not working. And then ultimately, the last one, which we both agree on holistically here, is that running an external reporting and analytics motion is really, really a great idea for most organizations because it's going to get rid of that internal bias. It's going to get rid of those political issues that prevent you from being able to just say somebody's baby is ugly, because sometimes babies are ugly, right? And then ultimately, it's going to get you better results because you get rid of all that bias and those politics. So Chris, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure talking with you today and hearing your approach to data and analytics and finding that common ground that I knew that we were going to be able to find.
Yeah, man, love the recap. And yeah, I expected that we would be really aligned, and it seems like that's where we ended up. So I hope this conversation was valuable for people that have been listening to me for a while, hopefully in clarifying the perspective. Even yesterday, I posted about a large-scale data set that basically said running lead gen campaigns on LinkedIn does not deliver appropriate ROI in this very large data set of 236,000 leads and $42 million in advertising spend. And people interpret that as, okay, don't run LinkedIn ads. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is don't run LinkedIn ads that way. The data proves it. So I think there's people that are not able to really, and it could be my fault as a communicator, could be their fault about reading headlines and not looking at the nuances. But we really need, when we're talking about these types of concepts inside of marketing and go-to-market, we have to be very conscious of the nuances because they exist and there's opportunities for misunderstanding. And I think that my position has been clear all along that the data is not the issue at Attribution. It's how the data is being used to drive all the things downstream. And that's what I've been challenging all along. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you in detail and clarify that perspective.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for joining, Chris. Well, best of luck to you with Passetto.
Appreciate you, man. You as well with your venture. See you, Drew.
Our next episode will be our mini-series recap episode where Andrea Lechner-Becker, my producer, and I will sit down and shoot the shit talking about all the things that we learned and the things that we think are the most important takeaways from this current mini-series. So come join us on that episode.